Well, I'm here with Jim Penman today, and really excited to have this conversation with Jim. Jim's well known as an entrepreneur in Australia here, with a very large franchising business, and famous for Jim's Mowing in particular. So excited to speak with you and to have you here today, Jim.
Yeah, good to be here.
So probably, I was really intrigued when I was reading a bit more about your story and background. You had this early sort of start in academia and sort of undertaking a PhD. And I believe the original thesis title was personality and culture. That was one that wasn't accepted for some reason. Can you tell me a bit more about that early history?
I call it personality and social change. It's basically a theory of, I set out to try and understand the reason for the rise and fall of civilization, so the biggest topic there is. And I came to the conclusion that it was basically to do with temperament, with character. It wasn't impersonal political forces. It's to do with the way people think. People are hardworking, enterprising. You have prosperity. If they're loyal to impersonal values and principles, you tend to have democracy and republic and so forth. So it's that kind of idea. And I identified it. Eventually, I came to the conclusion it had biological roots. There's something to do with the way we were evolved to cope with the environment. So that was my thesis. Was completed in 1982. Originally knocked back. It was just too outrageously different. The examiners didn't know what to make of it. Yeah. But the point about it, I'd always intended to have an academic career, and when I finished my thesis, which I thought would convince people, I thought people would look at it and say, "Wow, this is interesting stuff," but I couldn't get any purchase on it. So I thought the only way to continue my research is to become wealthy enough to be able to fund my own research institute in areas I knew nothing about, which is basically neuroscience and genetics and so forth. So I turned my part-time student lawn mowing business into a full-time business with the aim of eventually having enough money to pursue my research.
Yeah, it's a great origin story.
Yes.
Where did the early interest in, I guess, some of these ideas come from for you? What was the sort of early influences? How did you become curious about these ideas?
Well, when I was 14, a friend gave me a copy of the Thucydides, the Peloponnesian Wars, which was intriguing. I probably read it about 3 times since then, as well as. So it just fascinated me. This incredible, this amazing civilization, which basically went through this terrible period of chaos, and then after it declined quite rapidly, within a few decades, they were all overcome by Macedonia and became part of a multinational empire. So I just wanted to know what that was. And I became very interested in the decline of the Roman Empire too, which happened a little bit later. What happened? What drives these things? Why do people change? So that was the thing. And I also had an interest in biology as well too. Even when I was a kid, I was crazy about dinosaurs. And then I read things like Naked Ape and stuff, and just looked at trying to understand people as biological beings. So it was part of my way of thinking about it, even well before I went to university.
Yeah. And then you as a way of funding this passion and interest, you started the mowing business.
Yeah.
And as you think about back to those early days, how did that develop? So initially, you were doing the work yourself, obviously engaging with the client, delivering great lawns that were exactly what the client wanted. And then, how did you then think about that developing? And then obviously it's a big step to go from just doing that work to then building a business around it the way in which you did. What was the sort of key insight?
Not so much big step, it's a whole lot of little steps. One of the principles about business that I find is that it's not the huge idea, it's the thousands of micro ideas that make the difference. So when I was mowing lawns, I've been looking at things like, how can I make the edges perfect? How can I do it quicker? How can I pick up every blade of grass? How can I navigate between clients most effectively? How can I save myself one step emptying my grass bag and do that in the easiest way possible? Just thousands of little tiny decisions. And see, when I started getting busy, I started trying to put people on. So I had put in subcontractors and then I experimented with that a bit and tried different things. And then I tried, and I got into building up and selling lawn mowing rounds. Initially just my own runs, but I worked out how to do that. And I had to work out how to sell the lawn mowing round, which I wasn't very good at. I don't really have very good people skills. So I had to work out how to do that. So I was gradually developing these systems, and then in the late 80s, had this full-time business since 1982. In the late 80s, faced with a competition from a franchise chain coming from South Australia, which was VIP. I basically franchised in self-defense, and not really thinking it would be as successful as it was. At the beginning, when somebody asked me, and I just looked how many franchisees I might have one day, and I said, look, if it works well, I might have eventually as many as 100. That's what I actually said that.
Yeah.
We've now got 5,500, so it's done rather better than I thought. But it's always micro steps. Even when I looked, even after, I was surprised how well it did. After the first year, I had sort of like 60, and people were starting to investigate from interstate. It was just surprising to me that it did so well.
Yeah.
And even then, I still thought that was just a little thing on the side. I never thought it would really succeed. It took me, I don't know, like a decade to figure out this thing really has got some legs on it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I didn't really see it. And then the idea of going to different divisions and different states, different countries, it just happened bit by bit.
Yeah. And a core part of your philosophy has been, really delivering great customer service and engaging customers well. I mean, where did that come from? Where did that develop from?
It's an emotional thing. I just hate letting customers down. It's not really rational. It's not thinking that if I give great service, I get more money. It's thinking I just can't stand to let a customer down. I mean, I remember once I actually made a mistake in my bookkeeping and didn't do a couple of customers, and I felt terrible about it. It was out of proportion to any personal damage. So I had that emotional thing. I was one of the first contractors in Australia back in the 70s as a part-time student with a brush cutter, because they used to frustrate me. I couldn't do edges perfectly. So I was always looking at how you can do the jigs, how you can do the job better, how you can make the clients really delighted. How do you go into a lawn where the grass is like a meter high and make it clean? There's a way of doing it, and I developed that. I tried to teach other people. There's actually a video on my website about the system that I use, and it's different. Most people don't do it. So I just learned all kinds of ways to improve. But I think the big thing about gyms is actually not so much customer service; it's service to franchisees. They're my primary clients. Now that doesn't mean I don't focus on customers. I do, because the only way to get successful franchisees making great money is to give great customer service, both because franchisees who give great service tend to do better, but also if the franchisees as a group do great service, you get more leads.
Yeah.
So as for example, one of the best things we ever did to increase the flow of leads was institute surveys. So something over a decade ago, we actually started sending out surveys to customers, and we experimented with different ways to do it to get better response. About 30% will respond. Now, that I thought might have an effect on leads, but in fact, it was way beyond what I expected, because in the early days of the franchise, we used to really struggle to get leads. We've got a problem. Even the last year has been less than our best year. We've had well over 200,000 unserviced leads, and we spend less on advertising than we used to. In fact, sometimes we can't even spend the advertising money. All of our franchisees in Dogwatch got a free conference, fares, accommodation, everything paid for by the surplus in the advertising fund. We can't spend because they're all so busy. We've given back millions of dollars, unspendable advertising. I've just gone through and dramatically cut the advertising contribution from my fencing franchisees because we don't need the money. So that change from focusing on customers means franchisees do better. But there's actually, if you see on the email I sent you, there's a little three-line statement, which has been there since the beginning. Our first priority is the welfare of franchisees. We are also passionate about customer service. You notice the emotional side of it. We sign only franchisees and franchisors we are convinced will succeed, which is not normal in service franchising. I was determined to do it. VIP didn't do it. Nobody else does it, to my knowledge. Johnny King doesn't do it. But we scream, and any franchisor who puts on a franchisee who they have any reason to think will fail, heaven help them, because they're in trouble.
Yeah. they're your three values, aren't they? Those three
Yes.
statements.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
and that last one, I mean, that you're convinced are going to succeed, right?
Mm.
Tell me a bit more about that in terms of how do you sort of make those assessments? How are you thinking about that?
Well, interviewing is a good start. Looking at somebody, looking at what their background is, looking at the way they speak and communicate. I mean, we're fairly good at helping people who into business who would normally fail. I mean, just to give you an idea, you go into something like a cleaning or gardening business. They're different from retail businesses. Their failure rate is between 90 and 95% in the first year. That's statistics widely available. Our failure rate, people who leave us in the first year, is about 12%, which is not zero by any means, but it's a lot better. So we can help people if they've got the basic willingness and ability to listen and learn and follow the system. We can help them to succeed. But there's some people who just can't be helped. And you can pick that up in various ways. One of them is objective criteria. For example, you have a young man whose parents are buying the business, early 20s. Now, that is failure. That is just not going to work. And anybody we had one franchisor who actually did this, put somebody through. I found out about it. I stopped it. And then when he came up for renewal, I said, you're not going to continue. You sell. Got a good price for his business. We don't confiscate. But it was an appalling thing to do. We had another person who was doing it who actually had a person who failed their trialing. Put somebody out on the road. The person who took them around said, this person is not suitable, will not be successful. The lady responsible put them through anyway, said just ignore that, put them on. I found out, gave them their money back, and you're not going to sell any more franchises. So it's not normal. I mean, Johnny King's is a highly successful commercial cleaning franchise, and I used to employ briefly somebody who used to sell franchises for them. And I asked him, what were you told by your bosses as the criteria for selling franchises? He said $50,000 and a pulse. That's his words.
Yeah. That's not really a recipe for success, is it?
No, it isn't. But the point of it is, if you sell a franchise to somebody like that, you do get money from it and you get initial fees. But to me, it's just fundamentally immoral to put somebody into business when you know there's a very significant chance they'll fail.
Yeah.
And I just believe it's wrong. But it's also actually foolish in a sense, because the thing that sells franchises is happy franchisees. And one of the ways that I was able to, I was up against a much bigger competitor. When I signed my first franchisee, they had about 250. And they had, international, interstate, and they had fancy offices in South Melbourne, and I was running it from my basement sort of thing. People would say, why would I buy from you rather than them? Because they're bigger, better established. And I said, look, okay, there's some differences. Don't bag the opposition. Don't believe in that. But I said, here's this. Here's a list of my current franchisees with their phone numbers. This was way before the franchising code said you had to provide that. No, because nobody else did. So here's my list of my franchisees with their phone numbers. I want you to ring as many as you can. Go and do your research. Then go and ask the other guys for their list, which I knew they wouldn't give them. And the point of the fact is, when people rang my franchisees, overwhelmingly they said, this is a great system. You'd be crazy to go anywhere else. Jim is good. He'll look after you. He'll train you. And the great majority were doing well. So putting on somebody who's not suited actually hurts you. It hurts you because you have poorer franchisees who are less happy. Reputation for customer service suffers. You spend a lot of time trying to help people who are really unhelpable. You get emotionally drained. There's all kinds of reasons why you shouldn't take on somebody you think might fail. But the main reason is you don't do it because it's just immoral. It's the wrong thing to do because somebody's putting their life into your hands and you're taking their money and you know there's a very good chance they'll fail.
Lacks integrity. And, I think the model that you described there is the same model with customers, isn't it, really? In terms of thinking about the customer and it's the same level of advocacy that you want to see in the customer base that are receiving the service as well.
Well, we're very, very careful. I mean, like this morning, for example, one of the things I've been doing is dealing with some very serious complaints. and there are people who've been let down, we fix them. We just do. We have a thing called a warranty fund, and we remedy clients. If there's something that's gone wrong, the franchisee is responsible for fixing it. But if they've gone, disappeared, then we fix it. And that gets around. People recognize that we don't always do what everybody wants. Sometimes people demand things that they think they should get, but it's not fair. Like we had a system of a irrigation system this morning that just came up, and it was leaking. Well, the question I want to ask the client, what was the warranty? This is a guy, this was done a year ago. The guy who did it has left us, so we're responsible. But what exact warranty were you given? So I asked her for the warranty document, what statement was made. And then the franchisor got involved, and he said to, okay, find out about the equipment that's used. There may be warranties on that. So we'll help people, but not unlimited. But there was another case where a franchisee was to put up a fence. He took $800 deposit for, no, it was more like $8,000 deposit. It was a substantial amount of money. I forget the amount. No, it's about $800 for a fence. And then he disappeared, didn't do the fence. So we had to come in and say, okay, we'll fix it. We'll complete the fence. We'll give you your money back, whatever.
When you think about your own sort of history, are there sort of some surprising insights that you've had over the course of the business around human nature and things like that? I know you've studied a lot in this area as well, and epigenetics and all these other areas that you're involved in funding research. But what stands out to you? What's been your experience in terms of understanding human nature and how people operate?
When you're talking about business or knowledge in general, I'm an avid reader. I would read or listen to a couple of books a week on average, as well as reading a lot of magazines and all kinds of things. So I've got very different. One of my major interests is happiness. What makes people happy? And people are extremely deluded about that particular subject. There is this very common idea that the way to be happy is to have more stuff. If you can get a better car or a bigger house or more expensive holidays or better clothes, you'll have a better life. And it's actually got very little to do with it. In fact, past about median Australian income, income has very little effect on happiness. But to the extent that it does make people happier, what works is experiences. Buying stuff itself has very little impact. Having good experiences does have a help because we're very communal as a species. So what really matters is how much relationships we have, how strong we have, family, friends, and so forth. So people who are strongly connected, have strong bonds, tend to be better off. Churchgoers in particular, those who've got some sort of religious involvement, faith involvement, tend to be much better off. Married people better off than singles. There's a whole lot of stats about that. And then there's things like exercise, which is really, really important. I have very strong exercise habits, and I have for decades. And then, controlling your diet and then avoiding negative things like alcohol and drugs and cigarettes and so forth, which affect your mind as well as your body. So there are principles to happiness that I'm very interested in. And then you can understand this in terms of the way that the dopamine system reacts. The things you do that make you feel better in the short term can actually have a very bad effect because they tune down the dopamine system. So you respond less well to pleasurable things.
Yeah. There's a lot of that happening in today's world, isn't there? There's a lot of these.
Well, in a sense, it's what we're doing. It's the same reason as cocaine doesn't work. People say, why doesn't cocaine make you happy? Well, there's a very simple reason, because when you take cocaine, you get a burst of dopamine. That's why it feels good. But what happens is your brain gets out of balance. It says, hey, there's all this dopamine coming in. That's too much. So it dampens down the dopamine system, so it's less effective. And that's why the next time you have to have more cocaine and more. And eventually, if you don't have it, your dopamine system is so dense, so inactive, that normal life feels boring and spiritless and pointless and anxious and depressed. So you need the drugs just to have more, just to feel normal. And that's why addiction is such a problem. Now, people end up dying so often from it because it's really destructive. In a sense, that's what's happened to our whole society. Now, everything from junk food to video games to so much of social media to porn to all these kinds of things do the same kind of, they're like a sort of a small scale drug. And what they're doing to us as individuals in a society is they're dampening down our dopamine system so that the things that of life should be pleasurable, like getting involved in a meaningful work, or family, children, community, service, become boring, uninteresting, unrewarding, and you want more and more stimulation and excitement and stuff. But that makes the whole problem worse. So what we're doing in my research foundation is looking to ways to reverse that, to actually to re-energize the dopamine system, to make it work better, so that people will be happy doing good things in life.
Yes, yeah, and being productive. And when you think about your own leadership style, I know you've sort of probably talked about servant leadership as being a way in which you see that. Can you tell me a bit more about how you see your own sort of leadership style and way of leading the organisation?
Well, the idea is it's from John's Gospel, Jesus washing his disciples' feet. That's sort of the paradigm of leadership. This is in biblical times, washing somebody's feet was a very degrading, dirty job. It was the thing that slaves and the lowest people in society did. So when Jesus, in the night before he was betrayed, actually washed his disciples' feet, they were pretty shocked by it. It was so extraordinary. But that was that idea that when you're the leader, you're there to serve. And I see that with my franchisees. Look, I'm a very strong-willed person. People often describe me as a force of nature because I'm so determined. I just want to do things. But at the same time, that's my role basically is there to look after my franchisees and make them happy, and emotionally speaking, as well as morally. That's what drives me. I give my phone number, my email address to every franchisee, and I ask them again and again, call me, contact me, respond to me. If I send them letters after 1 month. I ring people after on anniversaries, like 10, 20 years and this kind of thing. I do everything I can. I would have contact with multiple franchisees every day. So it's the attitude. It's the moral purpose of your life. And life should be lived with purpose. It's not there just to enjoy yourself. Now, happiness will come out of that, but it's not the primary goal. So my purpose is my family, it's my franchisees, it's my research project. I'm a very happy person, but happiness is never should be the number one thing.
I know you talk a lot about character and developing character. How do you think about that? What's the process of that happening? How does that develop and so on? How do you see that?
Well, character is all about doing the things that you don't necessarily want to do, but that are important, that are worthwhile doing. Like just this morning, okay, I'm weak as anybody in a lot of ways. I don't always do the right thing. I have terrible weaknesses. I love chocolate, for example. I mean, I can't have it in the house. Any buy that just gets eaten. So don't have it. If you want me to tell my wife, if you want me to live a long life, don't put chocolate in the house. Now, I'm also lazy. So I've had this system I've received some input from my research team on the book that I'm writing, the birth rate crisis, which is due out towards the end of this year. And just couldn't get myself to go down to it. It's lazy. There's other things I want to do. Business is a lot easier than the research. It takes. This morning I just, okay, get yourself down to it, Jim, do it. So I actually did it, and I got into this, and I had some really great stuff. I'm about to have lunch with my research head shortly. We meet every fortnight. And so that was great, but it was very difficult for me because I would rather sit down and play some silly computer games or do something else that it's easier.
Yeah.
But now that I've done it, I feel very good about it, but it wasn't easy to do it. Now that's in a sense what character is about. It's doing the things that you need to do, that you should do, as against the things that you immediately want to do. And that applies to everything. It applies to exercise, to diet, to living a life of service, to helping other people, to not taking shortcuts, not going for the quick money or whatever you're after, the quick pleasure, but disciplining yourself And what we try and do is teach other people to do that. Like I was having dinner with my 15-year-old son last night, and we're talking about charitable giving. I actually give away about 90% of my income, which sounds an awful lot, but in fact, I've got a lot of money, so the 10% left is more than adequate. But then we were talking about charities and so forth. So I said to him, okay, you've got, he was talking to me about I should be giving money to other factors rather than my research, other sources. And I said, well, what about you, Aaron? What are you doing? Are you giving money away? Well, apparently he's not. So I said, well, here's a challenge for you. 10% is a good guideline, because I believe in tithing to give 10% to the church. I said, 10% is a good guideline. What about you thinking about that? So I kind of put it on him and do something difficult. Well, even when he was 8 years old, he's a great kid, actually. But we used to go on a fast together. So for a whole month, you can't eat any usually no sweet things, no desserts, nothing like that. So when we did it together as a sort of a discipline. So I try to teach that kind of idea, do the things that's difficult, but good long term. It was interesting too, the whole process with Aaron, because he found it very, very hard, very, very hard. He really wanted it. And I said, Aaron, it's your decision. You can have this stuff if you want to. But he wouldn't. And he stuck this out. And, and then we'd have a celebration at the end of it. He could have a party, anything he wanted. It was just a celebration. So we'd have, desserts and soft drinks even, which we don't normally have. But that was a celebration. But, that sense of achievement that he had was very powerful to him, very meaningful. He actually said to me, I wouldn't mind doing another fast, later in the year kind of thing, because it was such a great experience, even though it was so difficult. Yeah. And it's doing the hard things.
Yeah. Doing the hard things are the most rewarding. Yeah.
And you look back on them, and that's really what's great. I mean, I do feel so much better for having done that work this morning, which I've been putting off. I only put it off for a day, I must say, but I mean, it was still something I was pushing myself to get down to. And sometimes I kick myself. I said, Jim, you lazy sod, get out and do something. What are you going to do with your life? I really beat myself up at times.
Yeah. It's a bit like a friend of mine and I, we talk about sort of eating a frog, right? It's the sort of doing the hard thing sometimes, right, is what you need to do.
There's some wonderful books like Tiny Habits or Atomic Habits on this kind of subject.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just kind of it's about health and stuff, but it's also a moral thing. It's doing the things that you should do with your life. And that is the secret to a good life. And it's so different. People have no idea of this. They really think, if I just have more money, I can buy more stuff, more money, and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because, people only talk to me because I'm rich. I'm not as rich as I seem, I must say, because not nearly as rich as I would appear to be, but they do. But my message to them is not really the main thing. Forbes came out and done the interview with me, the Wealth magazine, and I said to them, the first thing I said to them is really, I'm an odd person for you to talk to because I don't really care that much about becoming rich. If I had to put a list of priorities in, don't even think it'd make the top 10.
Yeah.
I need it to do things like my research. I can spend $3 million a year on my research because I've got money, but it's never my goal by itself.
And, in sort of back to the business side of things, when you think about some of the measures that you put in place of success, most businesses would say, well, I'm focused on revenue, right? This is revenue and profit. But you've got a strong emphasis on customer satisfaction, I imagine. Is that right?
Yeah. People often say to me, aren't you proud of having 5,500 franchisees? And I say, well, not really. The thing that really makes me proud of anything is when I hear stories about franchisors or franchisees looking after each other when they adopt these kinds of values. I don't. Look, we do celebrate milestones to some extent, but if you ask me what my goal in business was, I could tell you very simply one goal. That was far more important than anything else. I would want to have every single franchisee of Jim's happy with their business. That would be my overwhelmingly best goal. And what's my second most important goal is that every client of Jim's will be happy with the service that they get. That is kind of the way that I think. I don't think in terms of revenue, profit, growth. Primarily are those goals. Now, we're doing some software development right now. We're about to launch a new software tool for franchisees. We call it Jimbo, which we've been trialing and testing for a long time. By the end of the year, I would expect that our complaint rate will have dropped to less than half of what it is now, just with this new software tool. Maybe I'm optimistic, but there's a whole sort of thing, because I deal with complaints every day. It's one of my things. And I see what goes wrong. So I'll give you an example. One of the major problems we have, the single biggest complaint is franchisees don't call back clients within 2 hours as they're supposed to. They should call them back within 2 minutes. That is your single number one complaint. Also, a problem with that, if they do ring them back and they can't get them, they're supposed to send a text. Now, so what are we doing? First of all, we're setting up a system so that if the franchisee, we know whether the franchisees call back. If they don't call back within half an hour, they get a message, which is actually initially in my voice, ring the client. If it doesn't do an hour, there's a second more urgent message. 1.5 hours, there's another message. And at 2 hours, I yell at them, basically. That's how it's set up. Now, whether they'll get rid of it and put other things, I don't know. Now, again, if they don't ring within 2 hours, message comes back to us. So we know what something has gone wrong, and we can possibly freeze their leads, chase them up. What's happened? How are you going? Okay, immediate feedback. Now, later in the year, what we want to have is a system we plan to have where the jobs can be booked into a franchisee's diary. So when a client rings us up or books online, instead of being told somebody will call you up within 2 hours, they'll get a message to say, would you be available between 2 and 4 this afternoon? If they say no, well, what about tomorrow morning between 10 and 12? Because we'll know where the franchisee is and how much work they need, and that's their option. So instead of, you would completely avoid this problem of people ringing back by eventually booking a job in straight away. And what that would do is increase your conversion rate as well as reducing customer time. Now, this is all immensely expensive. We spend multiple $1 million a year on software development to get these things to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a lot more than that too. When they can't get onto a client, then they press a button and it sends the right kind of message to the client. It texts them automatically. And then there's ways of handling them, not turning up to a job and all kinds of things. Look at the whole process of things going on and saying, how can we improve it? And because I'm so obsessed with customer service and I'm always dealing with complaints all the time, I know what to do about this stuff. Yeah. But that's the goal. And then if I can get my franchisees to give much better customer service, I know what's going to happen is they're going to make more money.
Yeah.
There are going to be more leads coming through. They can get higher. They can charge higher hourly rates. Because when it comes to a conflict, like one of the things customers want, they want a lower price. What franchisees want is the highest possible income. Well, my priority is franchisees. So provided you've got enough work, charge what the market will bear. Yeah. Client doesn't want to hear that. They want great service, but want it cheap. But my franchisees need good income, and that's my top priority.
Yes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When we interacted on LinkedIn, you were straight away instantly back to me, and I found that with customer-centric leaders are very, very responsive. They're quick, they're fast, they're on top of things. Where does that come from? Was that something you learned, or was that always been there? You've always been very responsive and so on.
Well, it's very useful to do that kind of thing too. I mean, you're a very important person to me to speak to. I don't know what your audience is going to be, but I can potentially reach thousands of people by an hour of my time. That is extremely good from my point of view. It's good value. So you're a very important contact. Sometimes somebody might actually contact me and they've got a potential for a new division. Now, most of them don't go anywhere, but sometimes we do start new divisions, and then that's enormously important. You can have, hundreds more franchisees, and just because I respond. I'm actually completely shocked at how poorly so many businesses respond. We had a case a couple of years back where we were looking for a consultants to do it. When talking about a 6-figure job, okay, now I got a list of 6 people recommended to me, companies recommended to me, and I contacted them all by email, by the proper email that was supposed to. You know what? One responded 3 months later. Isn't that lunatic? How on earth can you run a business when you don't even respond to your own emails?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing.
I'm astonished, actually, Chris, when I see how badly businesses are run. I don't think I'm all that brilliant. I just think so many people are so terrible at what they do. The
Yeah,
most basic stuff, not answering emails. Who could do that?
yeah, yeah. That's foundational, isn't it?
Yeah. I answer my emails every day. I clear at least once a day, my inbox at least once a day, usually several times a day. I clean just before getting on this talk. It's all gone. Everything that's been asked me to respond to has been dealt with in some way or other. And that's franchisees, clients, internal departments, whatever. It's all dealt with. I have a very efficient way of dealing with it. Start from the most recent. I do something with it. You don't skip down the thing. There's a process, just like there was mowing lawns. There's a way of doing it. And then I unsubscribe to stuff, and I get people to do other things, and I do all kinds of stuff to make sure it's on top of it. But I'm always on top of my emails and communications. I can always be reached. Any of my franchises can reach me anytime. If they want help, they get it.
Yeah.
Decisions get made. You just got to be disciplined about how you do things. And it's such a simple thing. It's not that difficult to do. Yet people get buried under these piles of emails. They just let them, and they don't hear really important stuff they need to hear.
Yeah. Just on that and the technology side of things, obviously I've been running a course at University of Technology in Sydney on artificial intelligence and how it's being used, and it's obviously rapidly developing each week. I imagine that some of that technology is something that you're looking at and using as part of some of your systems to enhance what you're doing. Is that right?
Well, we're starting to look at it, yes. Not so much in the IT systems. In fact, the kind of stuff we need to do in IT is technology that could have been done 10, 15 years ago. It's not that special. I mean, like a thing like booking a job into a franchisee's diary. I mean, that doesn't require any level of AI. It just needs to know where they are and how far apart they are. So, you're over here in the afternoon. This client is, 10 minutes away from there. So we know where they're. That's simple stuff. You don't need AI for that. We are using it in various ways. I've got a wonderful young man, Joel, who looks after the social media. If you've seen anything about Jim's on social media, it's him, not me. I didn't even go on social media, but he handles it all. But he's very interested and engaged with AI. He's like 32 or something, so he's way in that age group, and he's always pressing it and looking at ways to improve what we do and using AI and stuff. I've got some great stuff.
Yeah. There's been talk, certainly in the customer experience, customer service industry, of some of these AI tools, taking over and so on. But what's your view on how they interface from a customer service point of view? I mean, are they a value add, or are they, I guess, what's your perspective on it?
I see it very difficult to... We're a long way from the situation where an AI can replace a call center operator, for example. Still half our leads come from the call center, and they're the best quality leads because they tend to be... if you go online, people often tend to put multiple services in, whereas if they ring us, it's usually at least they'll ring us first, or often only us. So I would think it'd be difficult. I have experience of ringing up and trying to talk to some of these like banks and so forth, where they got this AI stuff on, which tries to get me to repeat something, and they just don't understand it. They don't get it right. It's just maddening. They just nothing that you say, because it doesn't fit what you're talking about. I think they're a long way from being useful. But look, AI is absolutely fantastic in some ways. For example, this book I'm writing, A Baby Birth Rate Crisis. Now, it's particularly relevant to certain countries like South Korea, where it's disastrous. Their fertility rate's like a third of what it needs to be. Japan, Taiwan, China, Eastern Europe. Now, one of the great things about what we can do is that it's now very, very cheap and simple to get a translation done. Even if you just give them the text, they can do a verbal. They can read it. That we can read the text. I've had it done, actually. I've got I've had my book. Now, I actually did the recording of my own book myself, but you can actually get an AI to do it. They even put an Australian accent. They even can put your voice in to some extent to actually read the book. and they can do it, or they can do it in a different language. I mean, this is extraordinary stuff. So what it means is that when we're going to put out an English edition first priority, but we're also going to have probably Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, Hungarian, Russian, Greek. We're going to have all kinds of different versions very simply produced. That's AI, and that's amazing stuff. They have me talking in perfect unaccented Turkish, for heaven's sake. And I don't even know a single word of Turkish, but it's great stuff. There are some brilliant things. And when I'm writing the book too, there's a program called Hemingway, which actually allows you to look at it, and then it suggests a way of simplifying the language and cutting the sentence down, which is quite useful because you've got to write very clearly concise sentences and so forth, and picks up problems with expression. So there's some amazing stuff around. And it's getting better. It's exciting, actually.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, we've been playing with some of those tools. I've got my voice in a system that can actually replicate it, and similar to you, speak in different languages that I've never spoken into. I should be able to speak French, but I don't. My mother's French, but I can with AI's help.
Yes, that's right. It's exciting stuff. There are some very, very interesting things coming out. At the same time, we won't need less people. We just need people with different skills, people able to do different things. And I do think, too, one of the things I often say is that the home service industry is probably one area that's going to be the hardest in the world to automate. You could have a sort of robotic mower, but someone's got to set it up and supervise it and do the edges, and there's all kinds of issues. So we're one of the ones we think we benefit enormously from technology. I mean, what we do with gyms would not be possible. Like, just an example, when a job comes into the system looks at it and says, who's available to do this job? Let's say it's a lawn mowing job in Parramatta, for example. Okay. Now, what the system will do is it'll look at everybody who's down for lawn mowing jobs in Parramatta. Now, they might be down not down for gardening, but they are down for lawn mowing. So it knows individual people. It's different to every division. And then you look at, okay, who's actually taking work today? Who's taking work right now? And that cuts it down. So you might have 25 people there. There's only 2 that are actually available to take the work, and you know who they are. And then you make a decision. First of all, if the territory holder, they get it. Otherwise, you look at who's had the fewest jobs in the past 3 days. And if that's the same, then you look at who's the closest. So you've got this whole technology to do with making sure the job goes to the right person, which is one way you can give good customer service, because you know exactly who needs work.
Yeah, it's a great example of a powerful way to use technology, isn't it?
That's right. Now, if you tried to do that manually, it would cost more than the fees we charge. You just couldn't do it. It's just too laborious and time intensive. And the franchisees can actually put their leads, they can ring the call center, but normally they just do it online themselves. They can change their work requirements.
Yeah. Well, over the years, it's not all smooth sailing, as anyone in business knows. What have been some of the biggest lessons for you, I guess, over the years? What are the things that stand out where you've learned the most, I guess?
Well, the biggest mistake I make, and unfortunately I have to say I do it fairly often, repeatedly, is I go into businesses that I don't really part of my core. Over the years, I have tried so many things, mower shop, computer sales shop. This is all alongside the mowing business, and then tourist venture, trade exchange on more than one occasion, factory, setting up a institute for teaching people psychology. I mean, that's just some of them. And the universal result is I tend to do badly and lose money at it. My wife is always telling me, because she's involved with me in the business, you've got to stop doing this sort of stuff. Don't do anything. Don't get too enthusiastic. I get crazy about something and I just want to dive in. And I make decisions very fast. And so that's probably my single worst issue. I do make mistakes. Sometimes I just make rash decisions. I decide things very fast. Yep. And usually it's a good thing, but sometimes you make very bad decisions too. And you look back and you go, oh, this is so stupid. Yeah. I think I've made more terrible decisions than any normal 10 people in their whole life. I mean, honestly, it's what can I say?
It's interesting that, because I think that's part of growth, though, isn't it? And development. I think what I found just in interviewing lots of leaders is that they would say the same thing. They feel like they make a lot of mistakes, but at the same time, you're having a lot of goes at things, aren't you?
Yeah.
So,
Look, I know so much more. I'm 73. If I knew when I was a mere kid of 60, 65 or whatever, some of the things I know now, I'd be so much better off. And just keep on learning, which is good.
Yeah,
In fact, that's one thing, I suppose, the longer you live, until your energy starts to go down, which it hasn't for me yet, you just get more and more experience. You just learn. I don't do that because that didn't work out last time when we tried to do it this way.
Yes, yeah. That prompts me to think about, if you were to start again today, if you're starting from ground zero with all your wisdom from the years, I mean, what would you do differently, do you think, that might surprise people?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. If I'm going back in time to when I first started Jim's Mowing, I would do monumental things differently. I would franchise earlier. I would understand that I would invest in technology earlier. I spent too much time worrying about contracts and stuff, which are really pretty irrelevant most of the time. I could have written myself in a few pages. It would serve the purpose quite well. I would know how to look after franchises better. I didn't understand what we call proactive calls, which is ringing franchises better. I didn't understand how important that was. We only learned from experience, but looking at different people. I would understand the value of meetings more. I would have got better training system in place earlier. We had a dramatic, when we started doing proper centralized training, we actually had a dramatic improvement in our attrition rate dropped from about 70% to 10%, overnight. But for our first year attrition rate, as soon as we started doing proper training, so I would have done that earlier. I would have appointed different people. I find it very hard to find the right people in some things. I find it's often better to promote from within. So you find people already working for you. My best managers tend to come from the shop floor, the people who've actually been with me for the longest. Like Joel, for example, is somebody who started 12 years ago in the most basic job you could possibly imagine. This guy's got no experience, no degree, no nothing.
Yep.
He's absolutely brilliant, but he's grown up through the system. Or Megan, who's a wonderful lady who runs one of my departments, and she's like in her 40s and she's never had anything more than a base level job in her life. But she's now one of my top managers. She's just got it. So I find people from inside are often the best. Our call center is often a good way of recruiting people too. We get people in the call center and they prove themselves there, and then they go on to other kinds of roles within the company. A lot of my top people come from the call center. So that's one lesson I'd learn. I would read a lot more. I only started recently with iPhones and stuff. Talking books and stuff is brilliant. I go and exercise in the morning, which is about 40 minutes, running and weightlifting, and I'm listening all the time, talking books, and driving all the time, talking books. The value of that is just phenomenal. There's just so many things I just didn't know. You spend decades learning how to do things properly.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Any other sort of areas that we haven't touched on that sort of are important to you in running the business? I mean, probably something I haven't asked you about is how do you think about culture in the business? Is that something that you think about sort of specifically, or I mean, you've got a very clear set of values in terms of what the priorities are and what's important, and you obviously live those values and people see how you operate. But how do you think about that?
Oh, culture is crucial. Culture is the hardest thing to get across. And look, if I took pride in anything, it's the fact that in general, my people in gyms have adopted my culture. Overwhelmingly, they're like that. We had a guy called Brian Duckett who was from the UK who came to one of our conferences in Queensland, and he'd had experiences with dozens of franchise systems over the years. And he came to our conference and he said he'd never seen anything like it. The culture was totally different. And the overwhelming thing was genuine concern for franchisees. Like during COVID, we had in Victoria, we had this ridiculous lockdown where we couldn't work for 2 months. Crazy, made me really furiously angry because it was so senseless and so harmful. Now, we didn't charge fees, obviously. anybody who would suggest that you would charge fees to a franchisee who couldn't able to work would be considered insane in our system. So we didn't. But you know what? The franchisors were not getting paid. They had no income. But as far as I heard, they worked harder than it ever had in the past. They were talking to the franchisees. They were reassuring them. They were counselling them. They were doing what they could with them. They really worked, despite the fact that they weren't getting paid. Not only that, but I heard so many stories of franchisees helping each other. So, for example, there was a girl who was in dog wash who was a student. She had no income at all. So the government says, you're forbidden to work. You can't wash dogs, but we're not going to give you any money because you're not a citizen. So she's faced with eviction. She's faced with, hasn't got any money to buy food. What can she do? Now, other franchisees gathered around. They gave her meal vouchers. We said to her, if you run short of money, come and stay at the conference centre because it's empty. So if people looked after her, and people would ring me up and they'd say, look, I've got no money, but I'm no income, but I'm not. I remember a test and tag guy actually rang me up during the COVID, and he said, I'm not working, but I'm in a good financial situation. Who needs help? And then we had a terrible, terrible thing that happened where one of our franchisees went crazy and killed his wife and his little daughters. I mean, it was awful. And I went over to Perth to talk to them about it and what happened and how we could avoid it. And they came up with all kinds of ideas about what things we could do. Like we now employ a counsellor to give free, counselling advice to any franchisees, and we train our franchisors in mental health, and we do all kinds of things. But one of the things they suggested at the time was that what if franchisees would act as mentors, unpaid mentors, to help franchisees who are struggling? And I said, that's a great idea, but that's an awful lot to ask for no return. I said, who would agree? You know what? Most of the people in that room put up their hand. It was most of the franchisees in the state because they were concerned about each other. Now, that's the sort of thing you really can't buy that. But somehow, because I preach it and I talk about it, and I'm a sadly flawed human being in many ways, but I really do believe in these things. And I talk about it a lot, and it does tend to come across, and it spreads through the organization. And the hardest thing about stretching gyms overseas, which we'd like to do, is that it's very, very hard to take the culture. We've tried it, and it's just difficult. If they don't come to the training, if they don't meet me, if they don't hear from me, if they don't get involved in what we do, it's very difficult. So we'd love to go into the United States and elsewhere, but it's so difficult to get people, because what people do, when you're a franchisor, you tend to think of authority. I'm in charge. You do what I say, and they'll shut down opposition. Now we have elements in our system. For example, our franchisees have the power to change to a different franchisor within the division, or even to a different division if they wish to. They can vote out their franchisor. They can veto changes to their own manual. There's all sorts of things in the system. They can appeal to me, which is pretty powerful. So the system is set up that way, but you've got to have the psychology behind it that says we serve franchisees. We are not the bosses. We don't jump down on criticism. We accept it. We listen. We learn. We don't get aggravated. We respond courteously, even in the face of aggravation, which is not easy. And it's not easy for me either. I'm a fairly passionate sort of guy. But you've got to try and get that sense of culture across. It's really hard. But we've done it to an extraordinary extent. It really is. And I know I hear so many stories about that. There's so many wonderful people in the organisation. I'm proud of that, more proud of that than anything, more proud of that than the income, than the numbers, than anything, is when I hear stories.
It makes me think about your franchise structure and your leadership structure, where you've got the franchisors really serving the franchisees, and they're really there to support them, and they can be voted out and moved around. Is that right? Am I hearing that correctly? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The franchisors, we serve franchisors too, but ultimately you serve franchisees first. But it's difficult. The voting out thing doesn't happen very often because most franchisors are very good. They really care. We also do. We not only survey customers, we survey franchisees every year, and that's anonymous. So if there's a franchisor who's not doing the right thing, not ringing people regularly, not being helpful, caring and stuff, it can come out of these things like that too. So there's a lot of kind of institutional pressure to do the right thing. But even so, you've got to believe in it. If you don't really have it in your heart, you don't have that servant leadership thing in your heart, it doesn't help. But we do also tend to attract certain kinds of people. So, for example, my book is fairly widely available. It's called various titles like Every Customer a Fan, this kind of stuff.
Yep.
That tends to attract people. Some of our best people actually came to us because they read the book and they liked the values in the book.
Yes.
So we tend to a certain extent weed people out. And also, if you want to become a leader in gyms, like come from a franchisee to a franchisor or start a new division, we're looking at things like, well, are you making money? Have you got great customer service? But also, what kind of person are you? Are you somebody who enjoys helping others? Do you have a reputation? Have you been doing that? So the kind of person who spends their spare time just mentoring and counseling franchisees who are new, and a lot of them do that. They just do it, not getting paid. They just do it because they're decent human beings. They're the kind of people we like to latch onto and say, okay, what about stepping up to the next stage?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Well, thanks so much, Jim. It's been great to talk to you, and it's an incredible journey that you've been on, and continues and into the future. What does the future look like? Actually, it's probably a good place for us to finish up. What's the future look like in your mind?
More of the same. I am based on Google. You can go and you can look at your expected lifespan based on my personal habits and all kinds of things. I'll probably live another 20 years, most of which will be in good health. I don't have an intention to retire. I love what I do and I believe in it. And I've got so much to do in the next 20 years. So I intend to forge ahead. I'm very concerned about the future when I'm no longer around, because franchise systems can be run by good people and then get bought out by some greedy financial parasite vultures like Retail Food Group, for example, which did terrible things to so many Australian brands and hurt so many people. I'm so determined that won't happen. So one of the things in all of our new contracts, there's a clause that says controlling interest of Jim's Group cannot be sold to anybody without the written consent of a majority of franchisees. I put that in last year, which my CFO said that's going to dramatically cut the value of business. And I said, good.
Yeah.
I'm setting up a structure. My kids have a say in it. They get certain help with buying houses and things like that for kids. But most of the money will go to the research foundation, but my children will elect directors. The franchisees will elect a director, and the research foundation will actually appoint a director too. So that there's a structure that's going to be set up by the family trust that will look after gyms. And I hope run it in such a way that the franchisees will continue to be looked after.
Oh,
and I've got some very decent kids and prospective in-laws, sons-in-laws too, that I think we've got a very good chance that it'll continue. I don't want to be a public company. I think that looks for short-term, and we never think short-term. You've always got to be able to make a decision all the time. What's right? What's the best thing to do? What's the long-term thing? What's going to be good for the individual, which means what's going to be good for us in 5 years' time. And that's not the same thing as looking at the next. Look, I could double my income. I make remarkably little money considering the size of it. Considering we turn over close to $1 billion a year, I make remarkably little money, but that's never been my goal. And yeah, what can I say? It's somebody could do some really bad things if the wrong person got into control, and that horrifies me more than anything.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for your time, Jim. I think we'll continue the conversation again, hopefully in the future, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Anytime. Thanks, Chris.